As we are all increasingly aware, and the scientists are telling us, the twin crises of the biodiversity and climate crises are completely linked. We're not going to be able to restore nature without addressing the climate crisis, and we're not going to be able to cut carbon in the way that we need to without restoring nature. And this is why A Rocha UK is backing this campaign, because this bill, the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill, recognises that twin dynamic. And so we're so excited to be launching and partnering with them. So tonight, we're going to talk to Amy a bit about the campaign. There'll be a time to ask questions. So do put those questions in the chat. And we will then be doing a live campaigning action a bit later, which will be a lot of fun. So without any further ado, let me introduce Amy. Dr. Amy McDonnell is the campaign director for Zero Hour, the campaign calling for urgent science-led action on the climate and nature crises, including this bill. Amy gained extensive campaign experience as a coordinator for Extinction Rebellion's Citizens Assembly Working Group, and has also worked as an aide in the European Parliament, holds a PhD in creation, and is partner with the Tate Modern in raising awareness on the CEE Bill. So we're so excited and delighted that she can join us this evening. Amy, please do unmute and tell us more about the CEE Bill.
Thanks so much, Hannah. And thank you, Jen and Andy, of course, for having me here and inviting me today. I'm just going to start by sharing my screen. Great. And I'll just make this bigger. Brilliant. And then I can begin. So thanks again for having me here today, and really nice to see you. Thanks for coming when it's quite a sunny evening outside. Really appreciate you coming to hear more about the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill campaign. As Hannah said, my name is Amy McDonnell. There's my email there in case you do want to get in touch, and I'll show that again at the end. But I think I'm just going to use this space. I know I've only got 10 minutes just to run through a little bit about the landscape and the need for the campaign at the moment, what the bill contains, just sort of in 5 points, and then I'll describe a bit about the campaign and where we're at the moment. And then, of course, it'd be really great to hear all of your questions and thoughts. So we know that we're at a dangerous point, basically, and the Stockholm Environmental Institute talk about this in terms of planetary boundaries. So they say that we've already breached 5 out of 9 planetary boundaries, which include climate change and include biodiversity loss. And these boundaries are actually the safe operating system for us to live in as humans. So people talk about saving the planet, which we must do, but of course we're also trying to save ourselves. We know we must do more and that there's a problem. So the government themselves say that if we go over 1.5 of global heating, then we could lose control of our climate for good. And yet we also know that our current trajectory just gives us a 50% chance of remaining at 1.5, and that's if the whole world does the same, and that we're also on track to miss all of our carbon budgets as well. We also know that there are 40 new oil and gas extraction projects that are in the pipeline, and that the government is currently being sued by Client Earth and Friends of the Earth over its net zero climate strategy for the fact that it doesn't equate to the cuts in emissions that have been promised. We also know that the UK, I was quite surprised by this actually, that we're one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. So I think we're in the bottom 10 or 12% of nature intactness. People say basically we're the worst, in the bottom 10% for our nature loss. So this is the landscape, like I said, in which Zero Hour exists. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how the CEE Bill, or the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill, can help. So we've been running this campaign since September 2020, when it was first introduced by Caroline Lucas. So we're a relatively new campaign. It's a mass mobilisation campaign. So this means getting everyone on board, individuals, councils, organisations, and I'll speak a bit about that later on as well. And it's using all of this energy and using sort of constituency, grassroots pressure. We've got lots of grassroots networks to try and push MPs and to outline the arguments for why we need this bill. We're a team of experienced different campaigners, scientists who we've written the contents of the bill with, such as E.J. Milner-Goulond, Professor Kevin Anderson, Tim Jackson. So we're really lucky to have worked with these scientists, because we were getting a bit fed up of talking to politicians and hearing that things weren't politically palatable. So we wanted in this bill to have a sort of translation of the science and say, this is where ambition should be, this is where action should be, this is what is scientifically needed, not what is politically viable. We're following a campaign model, this mass mobilisation campaign, as I said, that's based on the Big Ask campaign that led to the Climate Change Act that Andy knows all about, that was mentioned at the beginning. Numerous private members' bills campaigns have worked in this way, calling for new law and pushing in this way. So we know that it works and we know that we can win. The picture of the bill itself. So I'll just crack straight in, I think, to the contents of the bill. So there are two principal targets in the bill. One climate target and one nature target. The climate target is around 1.5 and it's committing to a carbon budget for 1.5. We know that there are net zero dates, various net zero dates that fly around. This acts as a stick in the sand, but the important thing is actually the amount of carbon that we're putting in the atmosphere. So we're calling for our fair share of this carbon budget, because you could get to net zero at any date and completely blow the budget on the way there. So it's all about the pathway and the carbon in the atmosphere. Our nature target is to reverse the destruction of nature by 2030. So in the, oh, sorry, it's a slide number there. So in the current Environment Act, it calls for halting, I think it's species loss by 2030. But as I said at the beginning, we're in such a bad state for our health of nature, that if we halt where we are now, that's a really bad place to be. So we talk about reversing and being visibly and measurably on the pathway to recovery by 2030. And this mirrors the global goal for nature that's being pushed internationally as well. And as Hannah said at the beginning, which is fantastic, is that it's really important to deal with climate and nature together. The two are very inextricably linked. For example, of course, healthy peatlands, healthy oceans will actually sequester and hold carbon. Another important aspect of the bill is for us to take international responsibility. So this is both in terms of emissions and in the protection of nature. So with emissions, at the moment, we only really see half the story. So at the moment, we only account for emissions that happen on UK soil. But as we know, a lot of the things that we consume are produced, transported and disposed of overseas. And so we're saying we need to take account of all of the emissions from imports, international aviation and shipping. And same sort of matching up the nature element of the bill with the climate. It's also really important to take account of our ecological footprint. So all of the damage that happens to nature through supply chains, because obviously we could perfectly rewild the UK, our island, which would be really lovely. But if we're still, you know, consuming products from, say, the Amazon rainforest and damaging these sort of key ecosystems, and all that would be for nothing. And finally, a really important part of the bill is to involve the public in the fair way forward. So this image is from Climate Assembly that happened last year, I think, or the year before now, maybe. Time has got a bit strange. But we're calling for a nature and climate assembly as part of the bill to develop an emergency strategy, like I said, on a fair way forward. We know that politicians are often actually hampered from acting in line with their morals. There have been studies on this with Professor Rebecca Willis. So it's really important that the public sort of share their opinion and actually help progress more in-depth action. And I can speak more about citizens' assemblies if you're interested in the questions as well. So what have Zero Hour achieved so far? So like I said, we've been running now since September 2020, and we have the support of 151 MPs and peers cross-party, which is really fantastic. There are also 200 councils that have passed motions in support of the bill, which is also really brilliant and helps build our cause. About 450 different NGOs, organisations, community groups back the bill, including, of course, now A Rocha, which is very, very exciting for us. And yeah, I think there are around about 30,000 people that have signed up, many of whom are actively campaigning with us. So working together, and what's next? So we're really pleased, like I said, to be working with A Rocha, and we see lots of potential in collaborating on all sorts of things together. And we're excited. It's a big year ahead. Of course, we've got COP15, which is the biodiversity COP, that we're working really, really hard. Obviously, it's a bit quieter than COP26. So we're actually promoting a nature debate that will be in Parliament in May on that. And we've got lots of other exciting plans. I think as a campaign, we're also really reaching out now that we're in this sort of different era and we can all get together again. So we're doing lots of campaigning in constituencies in our key target areas as well. And I'll leave it there for now because I might have gone over my 10 minutes. I'm sorry if I have.
So if you do have questions, I really would encourage you just to put them in the chat and we'll ask them. But Amy, can you tell us a bit about how you got started in campaigning? What was your first entry point into that?
Yeah, I think my first entry point into campaigning was actually through the Divest movement. I think I was at the University of the Arts at the time, studying for a PhD, which you mentioned. And so it was really sort of through that and through galvanising and getting support sort of across university and networking with different universities across the country. I think that was my first sort of taster. And also actually I've come as well through the democracy angle. And I was involved, for example, in the Sortition Foundation, and they're the people that do this random selection process. So they randomly select and then make representative a group of people for citizens' assemblies and those types of deliberative democracy processes.
Amazing, very cool. Do you have any tips for people who want to get into campaigning and don't really know how to get started?
Well, if you want to join Zero Hour, of course, is where I would start. And actually later I'm going to talk more about how to get involved. But I think, yeah, it's really good to sort of pick a cause and something that feels manageable, of course. And I know there's this feeling that it can take over your life and all of your time. So it's good just to begin with small steps and see where it takes you.
Amazing. And we just got a wee question in from Andy, actually. Is there an equivalent bill or law anywhere else in the world, or would this one be a first?
So this one would be a first. And of course, the Climate Change Act was a first as well. The exciting firsts are things like the fact, like we've said, integrating climate and nature together. Also, for example, the way that I was describing dealing with consumption emissions would also be a first. And it's something that we hope could be replicated across the world. So that's something that we're really interested in, this idea of it being adopted and adapted elsewhere.
Amazing. And could you tell us a bit more about a private member's bill and the stages that they would have to go through from here? What does that look like as a tool for campaigning?
Yeah, sure. So normally, most law comes from above, comes from the government, but there are ways of proposing ideas for new laws through private members' bills. So this is sort of backbench MPs who aren't currently in government can propose pieces of legislation, and often this is a sort of mechanism for raising awareness of issues, and most of these types of bills don't actually move on to become law. But there is this campaign strategy that I mentioned before that the Big Ask campaign used, and numerous other bills. There's, for example, the local electricity bill campaign that's running with Power for People that some of you might know about as well. And so it's a tried and tested strategy of building up momentum, building up support both inside and outside of Parliament until either the government of the day take it up or maybe it turns into amendments.
And where is the CEE bill at the minute? What's the kind of timing and where is it in the process? And we've got a question here from Barbara asking about, how likely do you think it is to make it through, especially with the summer recess looming?
Yeah, so we're almost now in, so every parliamentary session and there's a sort of refresh and we keep building and building it as a campaign. So there's about to be a state opening of Parliament next week. And then sort of all the bills get put down again. So we're working away in the background now, sort of getting our core team together, if you like, of MPs that are going to be presenting the bill in this session. So we're working hard to get the right combination and to sort of step up our game for the campaign. So that's, it's likely that you'll definitely hear from us if you sign up in the opening of Parliament next week, and then we'll be celebrating the bill actually being tabled again in 5 weeks' time.
Amazing. And we got a question in when we put in our e-news about this, about, what would you say to people who say, what's the point of aiming for 1.5? Shouldn't we be talking about 2 now? Even, they're mostly predicting that. What would you say to someone asking that question?
Yeah, I think it's, this is obviously true, and we've got scientists contacting us as well saying, about the difficult thing of 1.5, but of course, even if we are heading for a pathway to 2, it's really important that we do everything we can at the moment to remain at 1.5, and that we must stick within a certain budget to do so. So we must sort of get emissions down and cut emissions down now. And it's important to sort of hold on for now to that 1.5.
Brilliant. And we've had a couple of questions just around sort of like resources. I mean, someone's asked about the website, which I know is ceebill.UK, if I'm right. Do you have any presentations and resources people could use if they wanted to talk about this in their church or in their community groups?
Yes, we definitely have. In fact, we've just developed a new one, which is very exciting, and we're just gathering our resources for again when the bill goes down next, and just making sure everything's nice and fresh and clean. So if you are interested in having a copy of the talk, do get in touch and I can circulate one maybe afterwards. And do check out our resources on our website as well. Like I said, at the moment, over the next couple of weeks, we are going to be sort of refreshing and cleaning them up a little bit, but there's plenty there to dig into.
Amazing. And sort of one of my final questions, I mean, you talked about reversing nature. How far or how close are we to kind of even stopping further decline on that? I mean, how is the UK doing on those nature targets at the minute? And could you speak a bit more about that and potentially your plans around COP15, if you can?
Yeah, so yeah, like I said, I was actually quite shocked when I first heard that we were sort of in this bottom 10 or 12%. This is from an RSPB report, so this is quite shocking. And it's important that so people talk about reversing the curve sort of on a baseline of 2020, so basically now. And like I mentioned as well, this is sort of in tangent with the global goal for nature, which is being pushed at COP15. And COP15 has been pushed and pushed because of COVID, but I think it's likely to take place now in August, and there are some more talks coming up. So I think people are concerned about the actual implementation, and concerned that sort of targets will just hang in the air, which they did last time. There are these things called the ATURE targets, and I think we only met maximum 14 out of 20, I'm pretty sure it was. So RSPB, again, we're talking about this lost decade for nature, which was pretty depressing. So there's a long way to go, and this is why as well we need to make sure that we hold these international pledges and then put them into national law to make sure that we have to act on them properly.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Yeah, and I was going to ask you, I mean, I think I know from what you said what you might say, but what do you think the impact is of pushing? I mean, this is now the second time COP15 has been pushed back, if I'm right. What do you think the impact will be for getting good results if it keeps getting pushed back?
Yeah, I know. I think these international conferences are very tricky, obviously incredibly important, and people are doing lots of work, and we've actually prepared a briefing on COP15 again, which I'd be really happy to share. And we call for certain targets, again, internationally and domestically as well. And we're really trying to use this moment to, you know, even if things just remain as pledges and don't go far, it's a really important sort of hook to be able to push the nature side of things. I was actually speaking at the Cooperative Bank at a board meeting there the other day, and I think it was really starting to hammer home that whenever you talk about emissions, it's really important that you also talk about biodiversity loss, and that the two go hand in hand, and the risk of biodiversity loss. And actually, yeah, so I think this penny is really starting to drop in lots of different parts of society. So that's at least a small bit of positivity for you there, guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's I'm gonna wrap up our Q&A now, but I think that's an incredible place for us to kind of land with these questions, because I think that is so important to us here at A Rocha UK, kind of making those connections and really understanding it that way. So thank you so much, and thank you everyone for your questions, and thanks to Amy for your brilliant answers. That was really, really helpful. We're just going to we're going to do our live campaigning action now, so we're going to stop our recording. But to anyone catching up later, thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to check out Wild Christian at arocha.org.uk/wildchristian and the Zero Hour campaign at ceebill.uk.